The protests against police brutality and systemic racism have risen to a level that we haven't seen since the 1960s civil rights movement and the rebellions that spread across the country. I spoke with two supporters of the demonstrations, Tristan Taylor, organizer of the group Detroit Will Breathe, and longtime Detroit activist, Carolyn Baker. Thank you so much for joining me today on American Black Journal. We want to talk a little bit about some of the anti-racism, anti-police brutality protests that have been happening here in the city of Detroit in the wake of the George Floyd murder. And sort of get your perspectives. Carolyn, you come from a long line of activists. Your dad is famed in Detroit. Your mom is famed here in the city of Detroit. And I really want to get your sense around what we're seeing now. You growing up in the type of family and atmosphere that you grew up in, have you seen anything like what we're seeing now in terms of this new civil rights movement?
So I'm old, but I'm not that old. My parents have been involved in a lot of, the civil rights movement and the labor struggles. And so, they've seen where people have risen up, Myself, here in Detroit, I wasn't alive during the rebellions here in Detroit. No, I studied history, and what I can try to compare it to, just based off the study and the testimonies that I've witnessed from my father's friends, is the unemployed councils and the hunger strikes that took place during the 1940s and 30s. And so in the battle with Henry Ford and the police opening fire, the Battle of the Overpass. So, just studying that history and the amount of evictions and the food lines that were established back then and the organizing that took place, that's the comparison that I try to draw from, and I'm still studying that history. So but me personally seeing anything like this, no, I haven't.
Yeah, this is, something that I haven't seen in my lifetime either. Tristan, one of the organizers for the Detroit Will Breathe group, can you tell us a little bit about what your message is? What message are you trying to convey, and what change are you trying to enact here in the city of Detroit?
Yeah, well, as part of the national movement around police brutality, the first and foremost thing, right, is the fight to protect Black and brown bodies against state violence, and to repurpose and reprioritize those resources that go into that violent physical repression of our bodies into investing into our communities and into our bodies to make sure that, we have opportunities to be able to be our full selves. And in Detroit, that's not only fighting to defund and demilitarize the police and really bring accountability to an institution that has unfortunately been able to escape accountability and transparency for a long time, but also to highlight the systemic nature of racism and inequality and the need to deal with that on a systemic basis. And so that means fighting for a moratorium on evictions during the crisis. It means fighting for justice for victims of police brutality and making sure that their stories are told. It also means fighting for Detroit that allows all of its citizens to flourish and be safe. That's the basic message that we're trying to put forward.
You guys have been in the news a lot in recent weeks. I know that a judge issued an injunction a couple weeks ago, or a temporary restraining order for essentially banning police officers from using several tactics that they have been using during the Detroit Will Breathe protests. Also, you guys filed suit against the city of Detroit, and the city is countersuing. And we learned of the news last week that Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib and State Representatives Stephanie Chang, along with City Council President Pro Tem Mary Sheffield and City Councilwoman Raquel Castaneda Lopez, jointly signed a letter asking for an independent investigation of the Detroit Police Department. Where are you guys in all of these litigation battles that seem to just all be in motion right now at the same time, and still hitting the streets every night?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is I know the city of Detroit has filed to amend the temporary restraining order. I don't think they, as of yet, filed a counter suit against protesters. They keep saying that, but there's been no legal action towards that. And I think, you know, we are seeking to use every tool that we can to the advantage of bringing transparency to the police department, and reining in their acts. And it's one of the reasons why we're calling for Chief Craig's resignation, and why over 35 organizations is calling for his resignation, and why there's a need for an independent investigation. And his like attitude towards all of these things are pretty atrocious. And I think is the reason why it's also important to maintain our presence like in the streets, because we know that these institutions unfortunately have been able to you know, go away unscathed in a sense, and that if we're not bringing the kind of pressure and power of like people, that we're just going to end up being disappointed like we have so many times before by these institutions.
Carolyn, the General Baker Institute, named for your dad, General Gordon Baker, has been on the front lines of many fights here in the city of Detroit. One of the things that I really want to get your input on is we can understand and draw from instances and occurrences all over the country that there is an outright war on Black life, Black bodies of Black men and Black women. But in addition to fighting that fight, which the Baker Institute champions, you guys champion fighting, you know, the good fights, there's also a narrative war that is happening at the same time, where there is a narrative that almost tries to suppress and delegitimize these occurrences where Black lives have been threatened or have suffered at the hands of state violence. What approach is the Baker Institute taking in this fight in a city, and as a part of really now a worldwide movement?
So one of our quotes that we stand on comes from my dad and one other, Nelson Pierre, one other revolutionary. Our task is to make thinkers out of fighters and fighters out of thinkers. And prior to the George Floyd incident, you know, our lane has been political popular education, and meeting people where they are, you know, not speaking above them, not, you know, throwing out just a bunch of ideology at folks, and actually meeting them where they are, breaking down the system. And so, and giving them an understanding, like, even if we study my dad's history, he had an evolution that he went through himself. Yeah. And so, so getting people to understand that, like, you just don't become a revolutionary overnight. And, you know, there's narratives out here that make people, you know, the system that we're fighting against is very good at propaganda, understanding the system and how it works. Like, its job is to control propaganda and culture, amongst other things. And so we have to try to do our due diligence and understanding, like, we're up against narratives that make people think that they're in the situation that they're in because it's their fault, something that they did wrong, and not the system. And so trying to educate folks in that, and trying to educate folks in, like, what the role of the state is, what the role of the police is, what the role of the military is. And it might use this term protect and serve, but it ends there. It doesn't say protect and serve who. You know, they're protecting and serving who they're supposed to be protecting and serving, and that's this system. And not individuals within the system. You know, they protect and serve the capitalists, who pay, you know, they keep them in position. And so just getting people to understand that, is what we try to do.